Good afternoon and welcome to this year's IDM rollout webinar. My name is Mary Back. I'm a managing engineer in the Office of the City Engineer in Houston Public Works, and I'm responsible for the city's infrastructure design manual, standard construction specifications, and standard details. I want to thank you all for joining us, and I hope today's webinar is informative. I'd also like to thank all of our internal partners within Houston Public Works and the Planning Department for their participation in this year's review cycle, and I'd like to thank all of our external partners for their feedback. The results of this collaboration can be seen in the numerous updates made to the standards. In addition to presenting the standard changes in today's webinar, we'll also be accepting questions. We will be taking questions via chat. Please place your questions in the chat box as the presentation is ongoing. We have several presentations today and we'll be allowing time for questions at the end of each presentation. We have a team that will select the most applicable questions to address. Any questions we do not get to will be addressed after the webinar and posted online. If you're not familiar with the team's live event environment, this slide provides a quick guide. Select the Q&A icon on the right side of the screen and select the Ask a Question box near the bottom of the screen to ask your question. Under the Q&A Featured tab, you will find all attendee questions. Under the My Questions tab, you will find only the questions you've submitted. When you type your questions, note the IDM chapter and topic to give your question context. Before I present an overview of the updates made during the 2021-2022 review cycle, here's a quick overview of Houston Public Works design and construction standards. The city's infrastructure design manual, construction specifications, and the standard details provide minimum requirements for design and construction of a city's infrastructure that is operated and maintained by Houston Public Works. The IDM specifications and standard details communicate what the city needs and captures lessons learned. It's my team's responsibility to lead this effort with the support of various stakeholders within Houston Public Works, other city departments, and external stakeholders. My team is tasked with a tremendous responsibility, so I'm thankful for our internal and external partners. These experts provide valuable feedback as we update the city's design and construction standards. For those of you who may not know, the Office of the City Engineer is tasked with ensuring the city's ordinances, design manual, and standards are carried out in the city's right-of-way. The City Engineer's office sees several hundred sets of plans a week for review, so we're in a good position to identify problems within our standards and develop solutions. Today's webinar includes multiple presentations from city employees. Although numerous changes were made, we'll only be touching on the major changes to the standards. This agenda is provided in the webinar announcement if you'd like to keep track of the presentations as we progress. We'll do our best to follow this schedule so attendees can rely on when a subject matter will be presented. I'll start with a quick overview of the review cycle process. I'd like to point out that an executive summary was released with this year's IDM. It includes a summary of the changes as well as implementation of the changes. This can be found at the front of the IDM. Per current policy, each chapter in the IDM will be reviewed at least once in 5 years. The city has a review schedule that is posted on the website. The associated standard drawings and construction specifications are to be reviewed in conjunction with each chapter being reviewed. This year's review cycle included chapters 1 through 5 and 13, along with associated construction specifications and details. There's a process to address significant issues within our standards outside of the designated review year. However, care is needed to ensure all stakeholders are informed and changes have been properly vetted. A good example of this would be this year's changes to the microtunneling specification. Also, changes prior to July 1st can be made with the use of a supplement. The city didn't have any supplements this year, but has in previous years. Supplements, once properly vetted, must be signed by the city engineer and the director. Once a supplement is signed and put into effect, my team works to implement these updates and notify the community. Establishing the website, the distribution list, and this webinar are all part of setting up effective communication to alert everyone of any changes in the city standards. The standards listed here were modified off review cycle, and the reasons for this will be discussed during each presentation section. This is the timeline for this year's review process. This is a similar process that we followed last year and how we'll continue operating moving forward. The cycle follows the city's fiscal year. The open comment period began in August. The city communicated the opening via e-blast and it was posted on the website. This year, we extended the open comment period by 1 month. Comments were compiled, summarized, and provided to the review cycle committee. The committee met over several months and a draft of the standards was created. From there, we met with external organizations for their input. The purpose of these meetings was to vet and coordinate all proposed changes before they were implemented. Like last year, there's a 90-day design grace period for implementation of the City of Houston's 2022 edition of the IDM. For Houston Public Works capital improvement projects managed by the Capital Projects service line, Phase 2 final designs that have not been submitted for a required review prior to October 1st must comply with all standards in the 2022 IDM. For projects in the public or private sector, plans submitted for initial review after October 1st must comply with all standards in the 2022 IDM. The city must receive substantially complete plans before October 1st to be grandfathered under the 2021 standards. For plats and easements, submissions for preliminary plat review after October 1st must comply with the 2022 IDM. For additional background, refer to the 2022 IDM announcement and IDM executive summary. The IDM summary is provided at the beginning of the IDM document and gives implementation information for the IDM, standard specifications, and standard details. The members of this year's internal committee are listed here. We ask for representatives from each Houston Public Works service line and the planning department. These representatives are asked to keep their service line updated during the review. Once the city has developed a draft document of all the proposed changes, we work with external partners to get together additional input. Before we move on, let's talk about the website briefly. All the items discussed today can be found on the city's Design and Construction Standards website. An easy way to find the website is by Googling City of Houston Design and Construction Standards. And this is what the website looks like. You can find red lines for all changes online. There's also a revision bar in our standards to easily identify updates. Our next presenter is Nasif Hanna, who is an engineer from the Design and Construction Standards team. He'll be discussing general changes.
Thank you, Mary. I'll share my screen. Good afternoon. My name is Nasif Hanna. With the Design and Construction Standard Group, I will be going over the general changes for the 21-22 review cycle. This review cycle, we have incorporated change bars on our final documents. The change bars are located on the left side of the page to indicate that something has changed to the right of the bar. For more detail on the exact changes that took place, you can refer to the red lines online, which are located on the Standards Review Committee tab on the Design and Construction Standard webpage. The red lines only signify significant changes. Minor changes that do not affect specification or design criteria are not included. That means, for example, article numbers have been changed throughout the chapter, but those changes may not show in the red lines, but we are still showing the change bars for these minor changes to signal to the reader that a change was made. Only the chapters that have been reviewed in this cycle or previous review cycle by the Standards Review Committee will have the table of contents with hyperlinks as shown. If a chapter doesn't have this table of contents, it's indicated that this chapter has not yet gone through the review process recently. For example, chapter 1, 2, 4, and 5 are now organized into sections to help streamline navigation throughout the chapter. Each title in the table of contents is also hyperlinked to its designated location. Clicking on any of the links in the table of contents takes you directly to that paragraph, figure, or table. We also continue adding placeholder within the chapter. While navigating through the page, you can now look to the top left corner to see the paragraph reference to the previous paragraph without the need to return to the previous page. Please keep in mind that the changes that I discussed, such as the table of contents and sections, were only made to chapter 1, 2, 4, and 5 because those were part of the original review cycle. We have added new definitions that were not in the previous version of the IDM. Also, we have come through the chapters in this year's review cycle and ensured that only proper nouns and defined terms are capitalized. Additional general changes were made also throughout the standards specs and the IDM, such as references to the geographic information and the management system, GIMS, have been replaced with the reference to the new GeoLink hub throughout the IDM. Departments' names have been updated throughout the IDM and the specifications. Also, pronouns have been replaced with gender-neutral language. As it's shown, we said the director's designee instead of his designee. That concludes the information of general changes. If anyone has any question on the general changes that took place, please ask this question on the chat box.
Hi, Nassif. We have a question here.
Sure.
When will other IDM chapters be updated?
Okay. The remaining chapters, which chapters 15, 16, and 17, will be in 22 and 23 review cycle, and chapter 9 will be on 23, 24 review cycle.
All right. Thank you very much. We have another just general question. Will it be possible to get copies of the presentation slides for future reference?
I'll go ahead and answer that. Thank you, Katie. Yes, on our website, you can go to the website. There's a link later on If you click on Infrastructure Design Manual, you'll see a link to the webinar slides themselves, and you'll also see the video. We'll be posting that shortly.
Thank you, Mary. There's another question here. Do we need to meet the 2022 standards for projects that are currently at 90% design?
So for capital projects, it's going to be the 60%. Anything that's submitted for review at 60% after October 1st must comply with the standards in the 2022 IDM.
Thank you. And I believe more details are in the executive summary, correct?
Correct.
Another question here. How many requests for changes did the city receive for this review cycle?
We received over 260 requests for changes for the review cycle standards.
Thank you. And one final question here. Do these updates include any of the current FEMA requirements?
No, this year's updates didn't include anything from FEMA.
Thank you. Another one here. Can the public request off-cycle changes to the standards?
So we don't address requests for changes from the public for standards that aren't up for review for the year. We do, however, make exceptions for public health and safety, in which we would forward that request to the appropriate service line for guidance.
Okay, thank you. Oh, and one other question. This is a general question of, will PDHs be provided?
We won't be providing the PDH certificates for today's webinar.
Okay, thank you very much. That is all of the questions that we have. Thank you so much, Nassif. And up next,
Thank you.
We'll start with Chapter 3, the graphic requirements. It will be presented by Luis Garza. He is an engineer with the Design and Construction Standards Group at the Office of the City Engineer.
Thank you for the introduction, Katie, and good afternoon. The Standard Review Committee worked hard to bring the city's graphic requirements closer to industry standards. I'd like to thank the committee for their work, including Ross Ozuna, engineer at Gunda Adura. Without Ross's work and the Standard Review Committee's internal coordination, these improvements would not have come to fruition. Before we get into the major changes, here are some changes that should be noted. At intersections, cross-street details shall be shown at sufficient distances in each direction along the cross street for designing adequate street crossings. The minimum distance outside of proposed roadway right-of-way that must be shown has been increased from 50 feet to 25 feet. The IDM requires that plan sheet north arrows shall be oriented either toward the top or right of the sheet. It was identified that the flow for large diameter water lines can be a major consideration for sheet orientation. Therefore, this requirement is waived for large diameter water lines. There's a new article requiring to show ties on survey control or swing tie drawings to city monuments, control points, and temporary benchmarks. And it references Chapter 2 survey requirements for construction drawing requirements. There are new easement labeling requirements on drawings. Plat record numbers, easement labels clearly identifying the type of easement, for example, dedicated water line, combined storm and wastewater easements, are just a couple of examples. And labeling for private utility owners is, if that info is available, are now required. In addition to those changes, 3 major changes were made to graphic requirements. New requirements for importing standard details, modifications to standard details, and new CAD tools and templates were created. 2021 requirements allowed up to 4 8.5 by 11 standard detailed drawings imported onto a sheet. Here's an example of a plan set sheet with imported city standard details. We commonly see standard details that have been cropped and do not include the standard detail signature block. The detail near the bottom right is an outdated crop detail. This makes it hard to identify the detail's effective date. Also, two standard details near the top of the sheet are intended to be maximized on this sheet set alone. If the sheet is printed at half size, it renders these details illegible. With these issues in mind, an improved 2022 IDM requirement was made. The updated requirements explicitly requires that the standard detail not be cropped, and the entire border and title block must remain visible. Guidance has also been improved by listing some possibilities for standard details placed on a sheet. Our standard detail title block has been updated too. The title block has been created to mirror capital project standard title block. This is done so that the standard detail does not have to be shrunk within a project title block and can be printed on a full ANSI D sheet. The project information has been left blank within the title block to allow for project-specific info to be added by the consultant in CAD. A new section has been added called Modifications to Standard Details. It gives the process for modifying standard details such that they will be allowed by the city. The city has heard your request for access to the CAD version of the details, and the city will provide the DWG versions of the standard details on the HPC website. The next few slides will show examples of this modification process, but I request that you review the requirements in the IDM in detail. Here is a plan set sheet with a table of contents or index of sheet shown. Let's take a closer look at the table. Note that these examples are Rev 0 and therefore this plan set has completed city review. For requirements, each plan set sheet title will include mod for every sheet that has been modified, that has a modified standard detail. Let's take a look at these sheets to see the modifications on each standard detail. Here's an example using the storm precast concrete manholes detail. Let's focus on the area in the bottom right-hand corner. In the top left corner, the slab thickness has been modified. Per requirements, the modification must be clouded and have a revision delta indicated with a letter as a revision number. The revision number here is the letter A. Like revisions to construction drawings, the revision number, date, short description, and initials are added to the revision block. A large note with the phrase modified standard replaces the city engineer and HPW director's signatures to indicate that this is a modified standard detail. The engineer responsible for the revision will include the revision delta near their seal. And as shown on the title of the index of sheets, the sheet title will include the abbreviation mod in parentheses. Let's take a look at another example. This example shows 4 8.5 by 11 standard details on one sheet. Notice that 3 of the standard details retain their the city engineer and Houston Public Works director's signatures. Therefore, we know that they have not been modified. Let's focus on the standard detail in the bottom right corner and the other areas bound in red. Like the last example, mod is added to the detail title, and the modified standard note replaces the city engineer and Houston Public Works director's signature. Here we have 2 different engineers modifying the same detail. There's a few possibilities where this could occur, but we won't go into that here. The different engineers are indicated by the colors blue and green, and both have added revision clouds and deltas. The 2 representative engineer seals are shown near the title block on the right. At the bottom of the slide, you'll see both short descriptions with one engineer designated as revision Delta A and the second designated by revision Delta B. That completes this example, and we'll quickly look at one last one. Here's an example with a standard detail where there are 4 predetermined standard details combined on the same sheet by the city. Like the last 2 examples, the sheet meets the modification requirements. Please note that the individual detail title has mod in the title, and you'll see that at the very bottom of the sheet. Updates were made to line type, line weight, color, and line types for graphic requirements. The line color for existing objects has been changed from an extra fine black pen to gray. Similar to Harris County Flood Control District, the city will now require existing utilities in color. Line weights have been updated, and the extra fine line weight has been removed, and existing object line weights have been increased to 0.25 millimeters. Refer to sections 3.3.03 and 3.3.04 for info. Let's take a look at the standard symbol sheet with the new requirements. These changes are captured on the standard symbol sheet along with new miscellaneous standard symbols shown near the top right of the sheet. Now let's take a look at an example plan and profile sheet. Various existing utilities are shown here in color. Proposed objects are shown in black pen, and existing objects are shown in gray. The city has also created some drafting tools to go along with these new requirements. And these existing utilities in color will be aiding the city by helping them determining any utility conflicts. Here's a standard line weight sheet, which is a visual representation of the city's updated color table .ctb file. For ease of use, the IDM line weights table is duplicated here. The color grid provided are black pens as indicated in the far left note. The AutoCAD color index number and line weights are also shown on this drawing. Standard color pens for existing utilities are shown near the bottom right of the drawing. These specific colors have been selected by the city to match the existing utility colors used in GeoLink, the city's GIS system. The city's .ctb file is set to print those color index numbers in true color. Another CAD tool is a standard line types sheet. New line types containing words and symbols have been defined this year, and the city has updated its AutoCAD.lin file accordingly. This sheet shows a visual representation of the line types and also duplicates the standard color pens for existing utilities for ease of reference. The city has also created an AutoCAD template, a .dwt file, with the new line types, layers and colors that all match the Chapter 3 requirements. And this is provided on the HBC website for public use. These CAD tools, including the DWG version of the standard abbreviations, have been uploaded to the Eastern Permitting Center website. They are located on the Design and Construction Standards webpage under the CAD Tools and Templates sidebar located near the left margin at the address shown below. That concludes this part of the presentation. If you have any questions, please type them in the chat at this time. Sahar, by any chance, have we received any questions?
Sorry, I was on mute. Thank you, Luis, for your presentation. So I have some questions for you here. The first question is, when will the city post all DWG files on the HPC website?
The city intends to add the DWGs to the website as we work through each review cycle. Therefore, it may take up to maybe about 5 years to complete that task.
And if there are any errors identified in the city's CAD tools, who do we contact for corrections?
That's a good question. I'd say, please send your request to the Standard Review Committee inbox. These tools are evolving and be corrected as needed. New proposals, however, we'll have to wait until the next time Chapter 3 shows up in the review cycle.
Okay, we have another one here. What happens when the revisions delete a requirement, such as changing from 12-inch to 6-inch? Doesn't COH require the EOR to apply for a variance?
That is a great question. And I think I'd like to first, I guess, ask anyone on our presentation panel if they would have a response for that, particular to that question. Is there anyone on the panel that would like to weigh in on that question?
Yes, to answer this question, the city engineer's office would require a variance for this type of modification.
Okay, thank you, Gilbert. So the next question is that, do the drawings need to reference calculation sheets for items such as federally funded projects?
Oh, that's also a good question. I know that the city has some requirements where calculations are supposed to be added to their plan sheets. In this particular item, I think that I'd like to make sure that I provide a complete response. I'd like to check back with Houston Public Works and their team. And we'll respond to this question in the IDM Q&A document that will be posted on the HPC website in the near future.
Another question, how come the color templates didn't consider matching up with the ones that are in? There's a link here, texas81111.org, utility color code.
Yeah, so the colors that were chosen for, I guess this was discussed within the Standard Review Committee when the committee was deciding on the types of colors to use. The colors that were selected, the committee came to the conclusion that to make it easy for city projects and for folks across the city, the colors that were chosen match the colors that are in the city's GIS system, so that if you're looking at an existing utility on the plan sheet or on your sheets, and you compare that to the colors that are in GIS, that those colors match each other, and that the reviewer doesn't have to think of a different color when they're looking at that system. And so although that there is that utility color code, the city decided to go in this direction instead of going with the color code.
Great. We have just 1 minute left. I ask another question. What happens to the original PE who signed the drawings? What happens to the next modification?
Yeah, that's a great question too. In the slides, as discussed, there's different reasons why you might have a different engineer that would be adding their stamp onto those drawings. One of the considerations could be that engineer is no longer there, and this question, it might be project specific. If the project was being completed, or if the project was completed and the modification is being done in the construction phase, there may be a case where the engineer is no longer, the original engineer that stamped the drawings is no longer with the company, and so that stamp would be, I guess, already there with those initial, modifications.
Thank you
And
very
so,
much, Luis.
yeah, I guess, so since we're out of time, I'd say, I would reach out to your project manager to get more information on what's needed for your particular project.
Thank you very much, Luis. So we have our next presentation. So our next presentation will be Mr. Gilbert Portillo from Office of City Engineer. He will present Chapter 1, General Requirements.
Good afternoon. Thank you for the introduction and thank you everyone for attending today's presentation. I will be briefing everyone on the changes to the general requirements in Chapter 1 of the IDM. First, let's start with the table of contents for Chapter 1. We will be going through the chapters as if the changes are extensive, but most of the changes reflect rewording, clarifications, or updates using new technology. Here are the first updates. Article references were updated to match the correct article names found in the city's Code of Ordinances and references published by TCEQ. Article references were also updated to reflect the recently merged Texas Board of Professional Engineers and Land Surveyors, as well as the Texas Local Government Code for the ETJ. We now move on to the definition section. This section was reordered alphabetically to make it easier to find definitions. New definitions were added and are highlighted on your screen. I will now provide some reasoning behind some of these updates. As-built drawings were defined to clarify between as-built and record drawing requirements found in the IDM and in the professional engineering service contract with capital projects. Conflict verification was defined due to a new requirement found later in this chapter for capital projects. This requirement was added because the city's real estate services group currently has to check with the project manager that there are no conflicts with the parcel that is being acquired and or closed prior to closing time. With the addition of this requirement, the city can now eliminate a step in the closing process. Engineer of record, ETJ, and privately funded projects were defined to avoid misinterpretation of commonly used terms in the IDM. Here are more changes highlighted on your screen. Publicly funded projects and project manager were also defined to avoid misinterpretation of commonly used terms in this chapter and in the IDM. As previously mentioned, record drawings were defined to clarify between as-built and record drawings. The next section with updates was the plat and construction drawing review process section. Most of these changes were made to avoid misinterpretation of the current requirements. After external and internal partners on this issue for a future update. Finally, a footnote was added to this section to provide the public background information in reference to the city's planning commission. The next section with updates was the design requirements section. This section is split into two sections, one for publicly and privately funded projects. The other one is for design contracts with the city. These terms were defined earlier. The next section updated was the submittal procedure to the Office of the City Engineer. This section was updated to reflect the Office of the City Engineer's current procedure, which converted from hard copy submittals to electronic plan review since the last update was made to this chapter. Due to this change and to help achieve the Houston Permitting Center's new Approved in 2 initiative, all plans submitted to the Office of the City Engineer through electronic plan review are now expected to be in the final design stage from the very first submittal. A new section titled Construction was added to this chapter. This information was added to establish requirements during the construction phase of a project. Item 3 on this slide, geospatial data deliverables, was added as a new requirement for new or modified City of Houston operated and maintained assets. Mr. Anthony Powell will cover these requirements later this afternoon. Items 1 and 2 give direction on record drawing submittals for both privately and privately funded projects and city design contracts. Subcritical 2D refers to Chapter 7 for requirements specific to water lines. Let's look at that related item now. Last year, a new article entitled As-Built was added to Chapter 7 requirements. Now as-built drawing and record drawings have been defined to be in line with the city's design contract and were added to Chapter 1. These updates were also applied to Chapter 7. Therefore, the section shown on the screen has been updated to conform to those defined terms, and a reference to Chapter 1 was added to Article 1, shown here, to help link both Chapters 1 and 7. That concludes the summary of changes to Chapter 1 in the 2022 edition of the IDM. We will now open it up to any questions you all have.
Okay, Gilbert, thank you for that presentation. I think we have some questions coming in here. Here's one question. Will recorded plats be required in the ETJ?
As stated in the presentation, the verbiage in the IDM was left the same, and the requirements currently being discussed with other departments for a future update.
Okay, great. Thank you for that information.
No problem.
Another question here that we received is, what is the electronic plan review system that the Office of the City Engineer uses? It wasn't mentioned in the IDM or presentation.
Oh, well, that's a very good question. Because it's always ever-changing technology, we decided to keep the term electronic plan review in the event the system changes before the next update. But for everyone to know, currently the system is called Project Docs, and you can access it through HoustonPermittingCenter.org, and you can select the e-services tab to give you more information on Project Docs.
Okay. I also think in chapter 3 has some information on project docs too. Gilbert, this is an FYI. Okay, we have another question here. Does the planning department approve platting, or does OCE do that?
Oh, that's a good question. Planning department approves the plats. OCE, the city engineer, is just a partner that reviews the plats submitted to the planning department.
Okay. There's a quick question here that I can answer. How do we get redline versions of the manual? It seems that the version on the HPW website is the final version. Do I have to click on the black lines on the left, or am I in the wrong document? There's a document that's on the Houston Permitting website. I believe it might be on the Standard Review Committee sidebar on the left. So that would answer that question. I have another question here. The question here, Gilbert, is this means as-built drawings will be required from now on to present to the City of Houston and OCE. So I'm not sure exactly what they mean. Gilbert, I would if the person that asked the question could clarify. But I believe, Gilbert, correct me if I'm wrong, in this chapter we've updated the definitions of those items to match the city's design contract, so that we're using similar terminology.
Yes, Luis, that's correct. So that is following that requirement with the design contract.
Okay. And there's another question here. Is final design stage a defined term? And so on that one, Gilbert, I don't believe that is defined in this chapter, final design stage. Although we do give requirements, I guess also correct me if I'm wrong, Gilbert, or anyone on our panel. We do show the stages, final design stage. And I know in the design contract, the city's design contract, it also explains when that final design phase is. And so that kind of defines that as a term. Is there anything you'd like to add to that, Gilbert?
As far as for private development projects, final design means that's the final design that they're ready to go with, and they're just wanting permitting approval on that design.
Okay. Okay, here's another question. The question says, is this the first year that EOR can change a standard spec? This one seems to be specifications related. And Gilbert, I think I might answer this. The standard specifications can be modified by the engineer of record as a supplement to that specification. And that process for design projects through the city requires a signature from Capital Projects, one of their representatives for their projects.
Do we have any other questions, Louis?
We are receiving more. There's a new question. Why contract and IDM are merged in Chapter 7 record drawings? Will it be done to other chapters too? And Gilbert, maybe you can add to my response. The updates to Chapter 7 when it comes to record drawings. It's really the difference in the terminologies of the defining the terminologies. So those definitions are as built are provided and are made by the contractor in them documenting the changes that were happening in the field. Where record drawings is the documents that are submitted by the engineer of record. That's kind of the clarification that we've made. And so in the IDM, that section that was entitled as built really was a direction to the engineer on how what information is supposed to be captured there. And so Gilbert, if you have anything to add to that, please do.
No, Luis, you covered it all. I think it answered. The only question was the second part of that question was, will it be done to other chapters too? Well, it's applied to Chapter 1, so it should apply to all the other ones, but don't know if it'll be modified anytime soon yet.
Another question here. When you say following the design contract, are you referring to Public Works design contracts? Yes, that's
correct.
Yeah. And I think we might have a couple more questions coming in.
Okay.
Another question. I have another question here. Do you maintain the guide specifications in HPC? I think this one might be directed to the group that I'm in, Gilbert, here in the Standard Design and Construction Standards group. Our group does not maintain those. Those guide specifications are really maintained by Capital Projects at the moment. We help them by providing a table of contents on our website so that they can so that the public knows which guide specifications are available. And so, Gilbert, we have one more minute before we get to our next presenter. Let's see if I can squeeze one of these one more questions. Yeah, so it's another guide specification related question. So we'll try to answer this question in our Q&A that we'll be posting on our website so that we can make sure that we stay on time. So Gilbert, thank you for your presentation and for answering these questions. It's been very helpful.
No problem. You're welcome. Thank you, everyone.
So our next presenter is Summer Chandler. She is the Chief Surveyor here for Houston Public Works, and she's located in Capital Projects in the Real Estate Group. Summer, please feel free to start your presentation.
thank you, Luis. Here we go. Let's go over the changes to Chapter 2. Mostly the changes have been towards trying to clarify items or make the flow of the chapter match the flow of a project better. So just keep that in mind. That's the overall arching theme for most of the changes here. So to that end, we have completely reorganized the chapter. We also updated references and definitions. We now, new coverage requirements with an updated, diagram showing the new requirements for the limits of the survey, and new submittal requirements, and added an appendix. All right, the entire chapter was reorganized, hopefully making it easier to find items and easier to flow through as you're working through a project as a surveyor. We have also updated quite a few references and added quite a few definitions. Some of the references, we grouped them by source, therefore references to the Code of Ordinances will be grouped. References to state statute are grouped. We, as was alluded to earlier today, this afternoon, we updated for the new combined board, the Texas Board of Engineers and Professional Surveyors, Professional Engineers and Land Surveyors, sorry. We also added references to the local government code that deals with ETJ, or extraterritorial jurisdiction. We added 10 definitions. Again, most of these are just for clarification. More than anything, we define central business district, closure, computer aided design or CAD, control point, extraterritorial jurisdiction or ETJ, the engineer of record, EOR, official coordinate system, raw data file, registered professional land surveyor, and temporary benchmark. And any of the definitions that are in this chapter should also match definitions of the same term in other chapters. All right, here is one actual change to requirements. We have expanded the limits, the required limits for collecting survey information for projects with the city. Previously, I think everything beyond the existing or proposed right-of-way, we were supposed to get up to 20 feet outside of that. It is still 20 feet outside of existing right-of-way, but for proposed right-of-way, we'd like to go 25 feet to capture more information that is required for mostly for doing the acquisition of the parcel. Then we also updated this figure to help you visualize. I had heard from some people that the previous figure was a little hard to understand, so we've updated that to make it more clear what we are expecting, and that appears in the appendix, sorry. This is probably one of the more exciting changes for everyone, is that we will now accept electronic submittals for several things that we used to only accept hard copy. So field books, those need to be scanned, they need to be legible, they need to be in color, and they still need to be signed and sealed per the state statutes. Same with the maps and the meets and bounds descriptions, sometimes called field notes. Those all need to be, they can be submitted as a PDF now, still need to be signed and sealed, still need to be legible. If you have color that means something on the drawings, then you need to have them in color when you submit them to us. And again, the signature and seal must meet the requirements of the state statute. We also have some CAD file changes in our requirements. The CAD files that are submitted from the surveyor to the EOR, we want a copy of those as well in the surveyor's office so that we know exactly what was delivered by the surveyor to the EOR. We also are posting a template online for parcel drawings. So in addition to the maps and the meets and bounds descriptions, we will also expect a CAD file that matches the template that should shortly be posted, definitely in time for the 90-day grace period. And that is for people that are familiar with submitting plats, subdivision plats through Plat Tracker. This template is going to be pretty similar to that. And we added an appendix. We updated figure 2.1, which I talked about previously. We also added some figures showing the general process flow. Sometimes some people that haven't worked on a lot of city projects are have a tendency to do things not necessarily in the correct order. And so to make that more clear, we've put that in here. This is mainly for CIP projects, this top one. And this one that's underneath is for all parcel reviews, whether they come through the city engineers or through capital projects, private or public. We also have added, instead of them being something that you have to request if you haven't done it before, we have added the diagrams for construction of site control monuments, and we have included two options, one for doing it in ground and the other one for doing it on a hard surface such as a sidewalk. And that is a pretty quick review of chapter 2. So if we have any questions, this would be the time.
Thank you, Summer. So we have a little bit questions here for you. The first one is, when will the city move to the new state plane coordinate system? It should be out soon.
Yes, we are waiting to see and when that is actually released before we change any of our documentation. We will also need to discuss phasing in the requirement when it is released, and we can do some testing about conversions between our existing projects and newer projects. So that might be based on a newer system. So the quick answer to that is we will cross that bridge when we get to it, and we feel like we have developed some clear instructions for the engineering and surveying community.
Okay, another question is that, let me check. Why has the limit for survey increased for proposed right-of-way? What if we can't get access?
The main, one of the main reasons for increasing that limit is to capture more of the improvements on the property, which become quite important when it comes to appraisal of the property that is going to be acquired, among other advantages, but that is the primary goal for that. As far as access, the same as it has been previously with the lesser requirements, the lesser distance. Access where you can. If you are not able to access, then we don't expect you to pick it up. We would expect you, especially on a, because this is going to be mostly for capital projects or contracts with the city, we would expect to at least make the effort to get right of entry to get in there and get that information. But again, if you aren't able to access, then you are not able to pick up the information.
Okay, another question. Does the city use a low distortion projection system?
We are anticipating with the new state planning requirements that we will be using the low distortion projection defined for the Houston metro area. So currently, no, but we are planning on it once those are released and made official.
Great, thank you. We have 1 more minute. So let me check if we have more questions here. Why do surveyors have to submit the same CAD files they send to the engineer of record?
Mainly, again, we'd like to have an actual submittal that is the same, exactly a copy of what the surveyor is submitting to the engineer of record. We can always get copies of CAD files from the engineer of record, but often, they've been modified to, accommodate the design, and we just need to have a copy in case we need to go back and troubleshoot or look at some history on the project, that we have an exact copy of what was submitted by the surveyor.
Thank you so much, Summer. So our next presenter will be Mrs. Addie Jackson from Capital Projects. She will present Chapter 4, Planning Requirements.
Well, good afternoon. Thank you, Sahar, for the introduction. And thank you to our attendees for spending lunch with us today. I will go over Chapter 4, Platting Requirements, and Ms. Musian Fang will be available for questions. I will as well after the presentation. So there were not a great deal of substantive changes to Chapter 4. A lot of the changes were more organizational, so it conforms with the IDM. We will go over all of them in a couple of seconds. And one of the changes I would like to bring to your attention is that Chapter 4 is now divided into two sections. The first section is the platting overview, and the second section is platting design requirements. So the entire section has been reorganized. You'll see we've renumbered it so it conforms to 4.101 versus before it was 4.01A, 4.01B respectively. We have also added new sections. We've added a section for references. And one, this was done for clarity. A couple of things were mentioned throughout the sections with repetition, and we thought it would be good to clarify what we were actually referring to. So you'll see now that Chapter 42 is defined, or we actually identify what we're referring to, and the same with the Texas Administrative Code. We have also defined Chief Surveyor. The next slide, there's going to be a submission to Chief Surveyor. So with that, we felt it necessary to identify who exactly was serving in that capacity by definition, not by name, of course. And we also defined public right-of-way. What we found was that there were several references to right-of-way or public right-of-way. We have gone through and made it consistent. We've also capitalized it where it was referenced, and we have defined public right-of-way. So as previously mentioned, we do have a new requirement that all Class 2 and 3 plats that are located within the city limits as they existed in 1870 will have to be routed and reviewed by our Chief Surveyor. She'll be checking for compliance within this IDM and compliance with Chapter 22 of the Texas Admin Code. And we've also added a new requirement to 4.104D, wherein the design drawings have to be in DWG in accordance with the Chapter 3 requirements that Louise went over earlier. Now, these two new sections, 4.104E and F, have to do with the dedication of street public right-of-way. So now, if there is a requirement to dedicate 20 feet in width or less, that dedication can now be done via 584 dedication. If it's more than 20 feet of street public right-of-way, then it will have to go through Houston Public Works real estate section, and it'll go through their dedication process. They will oversee it according to their policies and procedures. All right, and for Section 2, the platting design requirements, as previously mentioned, a lot of these are more form over substance. So inadequate public right-of-way, we changed right-of-way to public right-of-way. Now, we actually did change in 4.201A3. This used to read approval of a preliminary plat by Houston Public Works, and this was changed to Houston Planning Commission. We changed the articles referenced in 4.201C to match our new organization and our new numbering system. I believe this was previously referred to as 4.03A and B respectively. And on our last change on this particular page was actually capitalizing public right-of-way, again, for consistency and conformity throughout the IDM. Here you will see that we've changed the article reference, not a substantive change, but this referred to a previous subject. I think this was 4.03A. And so now it reads Article 4.202A. And here, the last one, we capitalized public rights of way versus leaving it uncapitalized before. And lastly, the figures for chapter 4 have remained the same. What we did change was instead of identifying them at the top of the page, we now identify them at the bottom. And that is a summary of our changes for chapter 4. So with that, are there any questions?
So Addie, yes, it seems like we've had a few questions come in.
Okay.
The first question I have here is, are there advantages to processing street right-of-way dedications via the 584?
Yes, there are advantages. So where a right-of-way dedication is required by a separate instrument, that process was very similar to a mini project. The ESA was required. There was a title report or a title commitment. If there were any sort of title curative that was needed, that had to be done. Those documents had to be recorded, and all of that was done at the expense of the grantor because it was a dedication. So by doing it via the 584 process, the process is truncated. So now what we require, or what's required with that, is you have the 584 form that has to be approved by legal, and the approved meets and bounds and survey. You still have to get that, and they still have to be approved by our survey section. But once we have those two documents, we marry them together and we're able to record.
Okay, I have a second question here. What is the significance of the city boundary in 1870?
So that is the boundary of the official city map, and it contains the street reference monuments defined in Chapter 2 of the IDM. So as such, those street reference monuments are used to reconstruct the locations of our right-of-way.
Okay. We have a few other questions here. This question seems like it's one from the previous presentation. Does the chief surveyor review during the process of the preliminary plat submittals, or is this a separate review? And so Addie, I'm not sure if maybe Summer's still on the line. Maybe she can answer this question.
Yes, I can answer this. We're planning on doing the review through Plat Tracker, just like any other agency does, such as City Engineer's Office, etc. So there won't be any additional burden on the applicant. It will just go through the normal Plat Tracker process.
I have another question here, and I'm not sure, Addie, it may also be a clarification from another chapter. The question is, project manager is the city representative that manages the EOR for private developments? And that's a question. Is that the case, or is that for public developments?
So Luis, I can answer that question. So in Chapter 1, we define project manager as the city representative who manages the project, and that's for city projects specifically. For private development, the project manager would be the engineer of record, and it's spelled out there in the definition section in Chapter 1.
Okay, thank you, Mary.
Any other questions?
They're still coming in. Let's see. Okay. I guess another question is, where can I find the 584 form to be submitted to the city?
I use a cheap version. I know Gilbert knows exactly where it is, but if you go to the city website, houstontx.gov, and actually put in 584 form in the search bar, the last few times I've done it, the very first thing that pops up is like, it says easement document, and that is actually the 584 form. So you'll see it there for the water meter easements as well as general utility. There are forms there.
Okay, thank you, Addie. Okay, I think that we have just under a minute left. I think that maybe we should move on to our break to give everyone a chance to take a break from the presentation. That being said, we will return and be back here at 1:20.